to see beyond the degree to the lives it enriches, to see beyond the students to the opportunities they have to change the world, to see beyond what we've accomplished to an ongoing mission of service, academics, and faith. That is the university we have been. That is the special community we are. That is the Lipscomb we will be. Lipscomb University. We have faith in your future.
Speaking of jealousy, if you had a choice between preaching on David and Goliath or preaching on crazy Saul being jealous of David, which one of those two passages would you pick if you got to pick? Which, of course, you didn't get to pick, but if you got to pick, which of those two passages would you think that a preacher who's been preaching for a long time would have a bunch of sermons on? Versus how many sermons would said preacher have on 1 Samuel 18? I can answer that. The answer is nada. I got nothing on 1 Samuel 18. I'm sure I've referred to the story a time or two, but I don't have anything on 1 Samuel 18. I had lots of stuff on 1 Samuel 17, David and Goliath. I mean, if you've been preaching, if you've done 3 youth rallies, you've got 4 sermons on David and Goliath. But that's not the part that really gets my goat. That's not the part about which I'm also jealous. It's right here. This right here is this is the problem right here. In my little baggie. I'll read you. I'm not making this part up. Other stuff I will. I'm not making this stuff up right here. This says 5 smooth pebbles from Brook Elah. I had a church member risk life and limb and arrest from the Israeli authorities several years ago when he came back from the Holy Lands, and he brought me 5 stones from the same creek bed that David picked up his 5 rocks. This is what's troubling me. I had visual aids for 1 Samuel 17. I could have. This is what I could have done. I could have kept it in my hand the whole time, maybe throw it up every now and then, and you'd wonder if I was going to catch it, and then maybe I'd fake throwing it one time, and I had visual aids. I don't have any visual aids. What, I'm going to take a spear and hold it up here for 1 Samuel 18? And I know you're thinking, well, Chris, did you offer to share your 5 smooth pebbles from Brook Elah with Phil? No. He can get his own dang rocks. These are my smooth pebbles from Brook Elah. So if you need them, you can take them home, bring them back. I'm sure I'll never get a chance to preach on David and Goliath, so just put them down right there. That's the problem. But seriously, that is the problem with jealousy, is it makes you crazy. It leads to bitterness, and it's that what Shakespeare called that green-eyed monster which doth mock. I cannot believe. Wow. See, it'll bite you. That's what'll happen. They'll come up and they'll steal your rocks because you're so crazy with that green-eyed monster which doth mock the meat it feeds on. Jealousy leads to bitterness. It'll harden your heart. It'll poison your mind. It shrinks your soul. Jealousy is no laughing matter. When we read the story of Saul, we're tempted to, at least I'm tempted to kind of feel sorry for him. Because when you compare Saul to David, it seems like he doesn't always get a fair shake, particularly compared to the fair-haired boy, particularly compared to David. But yet you have to trust that what's happening to Saul is deserved, that God is doing the right thing. God knew what he was doing when he rejected Saul as king. God knew what he was doing when he selected David. And in that text over back in chapter 16 and verse 14, it says that the Spirit of the Lord had departed from Saul, and an evil spirit from the Lord tormented him. And so there's part of that, we don't quite get that. What's the deal? Well, you just got to trust that what's taking place there is deserved and God is going on the right path. And so when our story opens in 1 Samuel 18, Saul has already begun that downward spiral. Things are going in a bad, bad way. In chapter 18 and verse 5 is where we're picking up the story. It says that whatever Saul sent him to do, David did it so successfully that Saul gave him a high rank in the army. And this pleased all the people and Saul's officers as well. And when the men were returning home after David had killed the Philistine, the women came out from all the towns of Israel to meet King Saul with singing and dancing and with joyful songs and with tambourines and lutes. Things are going so well. He's killed the giant, and now he's gone out into battle, and he's coming back from battle, and everybody is so excited. Everybody is pumped because Israel is being successful, and we've got this new general, and he's a young guy, and oh my goodness, it's wonderful. And then in the next verse, we read, not the rest of the story, but the next part of the story says, as they danced, they sang, Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands. Now, this is what, if you ever had a class in Psalms, this is what is called synonymous parallelism. It's a key component of Hebrew poetry. The poetry doesn't rhyme, but oftentimes the poetry will say one thing in two different ways. If you have an NIV study Bible like I do, it points this out, in fact, in the footnote. So when it says that Saul has slain his thousands and David his tens of thousands, it's saying Saul and David have killed thousands. It's the same thing. And I know you're wondering, no, it's not, Chris. It says thousands. No, trust me. They're saying the same thing two different ways. That's not what Saul heard. Saul misheard what they were saying. Saul, it says in the next verse, was very angry. And it mentions anger far more in this story than it does jealousy. I think jealousy is only mentioned once. Saul was very angry. This refrain galled him. They have credited David with tens of thousands, he thought, but me with only thousands. What more can he get but the kingdom? And from that time on, Saul kept a jealous eye on David. This tells more about Saul's insecurities than it does the truthfulness of the situation. His insecurities are there for all to see. And so then, as we continue, it says, the next day, an evil spirit from God came forcefully upon Saul. So this isn't just a psychological issue. This isn't just, okay, he's a little insecure because he had a bad day. No, this is a spiritual issue. An evil spirit from God came forcefully upon Saul, and he was prophesying in the house. And that's really not the best translation. He's really just going crazy. He's raving while David's playing. And so he's going crazy in his house while David was playing the harp, as he usually did. And Saul had a spear in his hand, and he hurled it, saying to himself, I'll pin David to the wall. But David eluded him twice. And the part about the evil spirit from the Lord coming on him, that part maybe we go, ooh, I wish he hadn't said it exactly that way. But the rest of the story we get. I mean, in some paper in Middle Tennessee today, there's a story about some husband or some wife killing their spouse, and 5 will get you 10 when you get to the end of it. Booze was involved and jealousy. And you have one nation going to war against another nation, or terrorists from one nation attacking another, and it really comes back to, we want you to be as unsuccessful as we are, which is Frederick Buechner's definition of envy. We are insecure in our position, and so out of our jealousy, we are going to attack you. If you could have put a mirror up to Saul's face, I doubt that he would have recognized himself. He would have thought, this is completely normal. 2 or 3 years ago, Vicki and I were at a soccer game. Niece was playing travel soccer, and so we went over to the ball game. And it was pretty obvious after only about 3 minutes at least it was to me as not a dad, just an outside observer, that the other team was significantly better. And ultimately the score is like 7-0. So that's a pretty bad licking when it comes to soccer. And there was this dad on our side, and he happened to be on our end of the field. His daughter was the goalie for the team that wasn't as good. And I'll grant you that the first ball that the girl let in really was what they call a soft goal. In other words, she didn't play it quite well. She really could have if she really should have stopped it, borderline, but she didn't. And Dad's going ballistic over here. And he's yelling encouragement to her, in quotation marks, yelling encouragement to her. And he's stalking up and down, and he's huffing and puffing. And if I'd had any guts at all, I would have said something to him, but of course I didn't, because I'm just a weenie. But he's going, he's acting. I mean, what I should have done is to go over and say, do you understand what an idiot you are? You think the problem is out there with your daughter they're playing a superior team? You think that's the problem? You don't even see the truth here. You want to see a picture of an idiot? Look in this mirror right here. You, friend, you're crazy. Well, that's what can happen when jealousy takes hold. You really can act in such crazy ways. You can have these imaginary conversations in your head, and you can get yourself all fired up and mad over something that's completely created within your own mind. Saul's a crazy man. And as we continue on, after David eluded him twice, which I'm thinking, I believe it had just been one time for me, but David sticks around a bit. And again, here's the issue. Saul was afraid of David, verse 12, because the Lord was with David but had left Saul. So he sent David away from him, and he gave him command over 1,000 men. And David led the troops in their campaigns. In everything he did, verse 14, he had great success because the Lord was with him. When Saul saw how successful he was afraid of him. You see all these emotions, right? Jealousy is mentioned once. Fear is mentioned about 3 times. Anger is mentioned about twice. All of this is boiling up out of Saul's own insecurities. But all Israel and Judah loved David because he led them in his campaigns. And so Saul, after he's not able to just flat out kill him, sends him out to the battlefield, hoping that, maybe he's going to be killed in battle. And then Saul does something interesting, which was pretty normal back then, but still there's something about this. He offers a daughter to the one who can slay Philistines. And then he kind of takes back on that deal, and then he offers another daughter, Michal. Jealousy leads the king of Israel to use his own children like they're pawns. Now again, I know they did that kind of thing back then, but still, you're offering your daughter to this man whom you hope is going to die. And then the story kind of ends in verse 28. Saul realized that the Lord was with David, and his daughter Michal loved him, and Saul became still more afraid. And he remained his enemy the rest of his days. Now, I did skip one part in the story. If you got your Bibles there, you can read it. I'm not going to read it out loud, but it's the part about where he's saying, now you need to if you bring 200 Philistines back, and you bring these 200 back, and they're dead, and then I'm going to give you the wife. And so it's mixed company. So I just decided not to read that part. It does, and those of you who don't have your Bibles, you're thinking, man, what's in there? I wish I had my Bible. Well, you should have your Bible, but it does remind me one time at Vacation Bible School years ago, Brother Moffitt and Brother Brewer were both teaching 6th grade VBS. In a 6th grade class, they taught every year. Brother Moffitt would teach one day, Brother Brewer would teach the second day, and so they're going back and forth. And it's Brother Moffitt's turn to teach, and he's teaching from Acts chapter 8. And so he kind of finishes the story. Sweet little girl raises her hand and says, "Brother Moffat, what's a eunuch?" And Brother Moffat said, "Well, that's a really good question. And I'm going to let Brother Brewer answer that." Brother Brewer was not a particularly violent man, but he did tell Brother Moffat later, "You ever do that again, I'll kill you." So I'll let your preacher back home explain the whole thing about anyway. Aristotle says that jealousy is a particular problem of peers. And if you think about that, you're not jealous of people who are outside your league. I mean, they're just out there. You're not jealous of the Kardashians. I mean, you might laugh at them, but you're not jealous of wealth or all the other things that they possess. But the girl that was your sweet mate in college, who from outward appearances did a little better in marriage, and her kids have been, a lot more successful than yours. And she's got things that you don't have. That's a different story. Or the little church that's, they'd never just come right out and say it, but the fact is they're jealous of this mega church that's stealing all of their people, this mega church right down the street. And they're not really appreciative of that. I sure can't identify with the story that Oscar Wilde told. There was this holy man, he was a hermit, lived out by himself, and all these devils were trying to tempt him, to get him to fall. They tried everything. They tried passions. They even tried to appeal to his pride, and they didn't have any success at all. And they came back, brought the report to Satan. He said, "Boys, just watch this." And so Satan went to the hermit out in the back country of wherever, and he came up to him and he whispered, he says, "Have you heard the good news? Your brother has just been made Bishop of Alexandria." And his face just clouded, immediately clouded with all sorts of jealousy. Now, granted, everybody in this room has had a moment where you realize your jealousy was misplaced. In other words, you were jealous of somebody that you probably shouldn't have bothered. We had a family in the church where I was as a teenager, church about 150, 200. And all of us were about the same. All of us were middle class, maybe lower middle class. We probably had 2 or 3 poor people, but we were all kind of like clumped together. We had one family that was wealthy. And they lived, and I'm not making this part up because, again, preachers do kind of make some stuff up. This part I'm not making up. They lived on what everybody in town called Snob Hill. It was, and there weren't many hills in the Delta, so if it was just a small rise, we'd call it a hill. And so it was a small rise, and there was just a little bitty hill, and it was the road that went by the country club. They were the only people at our church who lived at the country club. And they didn't really endear themselves to us because they had this habit. In fact, I told my mom this Tuesday of this week. She didn't remember this. My sister did, though. They would come, and on the Sundays that he wasn't leading singing, they'd stay for 2 or 3 songs. They'd take the Lord's Supper, and then what did they do? They left. I didn't know you could do that. Do you get points if you don't stay all the way through? They left. It was like they were communicating to us that we're not good enough. Y'all aren't good enough for us to stay the whole time. Jealous. Well, the guy got in financial trouble not long after I moved away. Lost his business, declared bankruptcy. He died at a relatively young age. His wife was fired from her job at the bank because something about her husband, if he declared bankruptcy, then she lost her job. These were the people we were jealous of. I pulled off my shelf just last week a book about the 7 deadly sins, because one of the 7 deadly sins is jealousy. And I'm reading this book, and I remember that it was written by a young preacher, late 30s, PhD, and he's at a flagship church in his particular denomination. The church building is right beside their key seminary. So in other words, he's like, in terms of the worldly way of measuring successful preachers, he's at the top at about 38. And so I read the chapter, and then I thought, I wonder what ever happened. And so a little quick Google search showed me that he had been separated from his wife for several years, and then he divorced. And then back in 2013, all the newspaper articles were about how he was returning from 30 days in rehab. Talked about how lonely it was to be a senior minister. How he'd started medicating his depression with booze. He was coming back and he was resigning, and then he was going back for 90 days. I can't say that several years ago when I read that book, as a young preacher, I was jealous, but I remember thinking, wowzers. So we've had that experience of being jealous and then finding out maybe it was a bit misplaced. But then honestly, sometimes there's a lot to be jealous of. I mean, there is. It's not like we're just insecure. I mean, think about David. David could do everything. I mean, the guy's a Renaissance guy. He's a mighty warrior. He's a man's man, and he's a ladies' man, and he writes poetry, for Pete's sakes. I mean, how many men's, whatever we are, how many of us are writing poetry? Well, if we are, we're not telling anybody about it. And he can play a musical instrument. I mean, granted, it wasn't something cool like a guitar, but it was kind of in the same, kind of time frame, same general frame of instruments. He could do everything. So, see, sometimes people really are smarter than you, and they're cuter than you are, and they're skinnier than you are, and they're more successful than you are, and they're a better Christian than you are. And I read a book, started reading a book, Grit. It's a number 4 on the nonfiction list. And basically the author talks about how certain people have this ability to be gritty, to continue. And I'm thinking, yeah, this is me. I'm Mr. Grit, And they have this little self-test at the beginning of the book. No, I'm not even gritty. I'm not even sand. I don't know what I am, but I'm just like, I don't know what I am because I quit reading the book. And so sometimes people really are better. And at that point, you just have to remember the words that you say to your children when your children are complaining about any number of things. So you've got your 6-year-old who's complaining because the 8-year-old gets to stay up 30 minutes longer than they do, or any number of things that children complain, whether they're 6 or 16. And the good parents in the room, you say these words sweetly. You say these words with compassion, and you say these words with a certain intonation, and basically, and so you say, well, sweetie, because what they've said is that's not fair. And you say, well, life's not fair. And then, so that's 5 of you. The rest of us, we enjoy saying this. We say it with a condescending tone, and we say it maybe with a little snarl as we swat them on the rear end as they're heading down to, well, life's not, tell you what now, life's not fair. And it just feels so good to say that. You've been waiting 20 years to be able to say this to another human being, and so now you're able to say it. Life's not fair, and life is not fair. It is not fair that you weren't born in North Korea. It is not fair that you didn't die in a 4-wheeler accident when you were 13 like your friend did. It is not fair that your parents are still alive when your best friend's parents have been dead for 20 years. It is not fair that everybody in this room is going to walk out and we're going to stuff our faces and we are absolutely going to have as much to eat as we want to eat. It's not fair that you've got the time to take vacation to come here and listen to all of these speakers. You are exactly right. Life is not fair. Jealousy. When we're jealous, what we're doing is we're denying the fact of God's goodness. We're saying that God has not given us enough, and I want something of what this other person has, whatever that other person may have. We are denying the basic goodness of God. I had a conversation with one of our members 2 weeks ago. Her home was destroyed in the Nashville flood, 2010. And she's told me on multiple occasions about how thankful she was for the flood. I mean, I bet you I've heard her say that 10 times over the last 6 years. And so we're having this conversation again, and we talked for like 5 minutes. I felt like I was standing on holy ground. Because she had the experience of a Sunday morning, about 8 o'clock in the morning, somebody banging on her door saying, you got 5 minutes to get out. And within 20 minutes, her house had about 3 feet of water. You don't have time to save anything. Refrigerator, couch, wedding pictures, nothing. And she said, Chris, you know, I'm so thankful for that flood because I lost materially. I lost everything. But what I learned was that God was enough. Oh, my goodness. The close to Pat Summitt's last book, Sum It Up, has this, it's just lyrical. Pat at that time had already been diagnosed with early onset dementia. She'd had it for a couple of years. I know she had a co-writer help her with the book. I think it came out maybe 2 years ago. And I remember reading it. I remember crying when I read it. And I wrote it down in a journal. So let me just read it. Shortly before Tyler left home to begin his own adult life, he planted a vegetable garden for me. It's on a ridge just by my house, overlooking the little river. Every morning I walk my dogs to the top of my property, where you can see just around the bend of the river toward the Smoky Mountains. And on the clear days, you can gaze far into the distance, 4 ghostly ridges away. Standing there, I know something with a certainty. God doesn't take things away to be cruel. He takes things away to make room for other things. He takes things away to lighten us. He takes things away so we can fly. When you believe, when you really believe that God is enough, you will never be jealous, ever again. Blessings to you.